What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Ghostcast. My friend Tom and I are here with a very exciting announcement. Tom, what do we got today?
Oh man, Matt, am I excited about this. I know you and I have been talking about this for literally years. And you and I have been going back and forth looking at all the posts on my little teases here, and we love seeing everybody's guests. But believe me, Matt was 100% right last night when you said you didn't even know you needed this until you knew you needed it. Okay.
Exactly. I didn't even know this guy existed.
Right.
Until a couple weeks ago.
And from what we understand, what we've learned, this gentleman's name is not known to the Ghostbusters fandom yet, and so we're going to.
Although you know it.
Although
there are
you
other
know
people
it.
with the same name.
Yeah, you know it. If you like banana pancakes, you know it. But our signing is with Mr. Jack Johnson, production illustrator for Ghostbusters 2. You are very familiar with his work because, frankly, he painted this iconic image. Right.
What?
He did a number of these last summer with Will Deutschendorf, and this is one of them. And we've been looking for the gentleman who painted this before and since then. And so we've tracked him down. Jack did a bunch of pre-production artwork for Ghostbusters 2. You'll see multiple prints available for order, including his final version of the Four Guys. We all know it as the Fettuccines, but there was no name for it. And we're just really, really excited. Following this short introduction, we encourage you to stick around. We do have a full-length interview with Jack talking about his work. It's Matt, myself, and our friend of the group, Craig Goldberg from Yes Have Some podcast, having a nice chat with Jack.
Yeah, I'm super excited. You're talking about a guy who helped create and imagine some of our favorite places from our favorite films growing up. We're talking not only Goonies, but Edward Scissorhands, Jurassic Park 3, Kindergarten Cop.
Christmas Vacation.
I love that movie. Christmas Vacation.
A Lost
Place. Is there a better movie than Christmas Vacation? Because I don't think there is.
Ghostbusters 2.
I mean, Christmas movie. Okay.
It's also a Christmas. Okay. It's a New Year's movie. Sort of. They were Santa hats in.
That's true. That is true. They have that one segment. But this is a huge, exciting announcement, and only really known up until this point by Goonies fans. And so we're really excited to help introduce Jack to the world of the Ghostbusters.
And so please watch this interview. It's really, really great. We had a blast doing it. Take a look at the post. We have prints for pre-sale. We also will accept send-ins if you have a personal item you'd like Jack to sign, such as a Ghostbusters poster, or maybe you did one of these through us last summer. We'll be happy to accept your send-ins. It's going to be a little bit of a delay. Read the post. You get all those details. But we're really, really excited to work with Jack. He's really excited to work with us. We thank you all for your excitement, and we hope that you are as excited as we are about this because, frankly, we're over the moon with this particular offering.
Our interview with our new friend, Jack Johnson.
You're on with Tom and Matt here from the containment unit. We have a very special co-worker, cohort, friend of the group, if you will. Craig Goldberg from Yes Have Some podcast is with us today. Morning, hello. Craig. Jack, we're really excited to chat with you, all three of us here. Your work is stunning. We are proud and honored to be the ones to kind of introduce you to the Ghostbusters fandom. For those of you watching this, Jack was a production illustrator on Ghostbusters 2. He's responsible for some iconic things that we're going to talk about. But before we get into that, Jack, we know you had a career in Hollywood that spanned over 27 years. And I was just wanting to, hear how you got started. And was art always your passion?
I think by the time I was 6, I sort of knew I was going there somewhere. All it takes is you do a little thing with some crayons of a cat, and it sort of looks like a cat, and you have some aunt that says, "Oh my God, that's wonderful! It looks like a cat," and you're done. Anyway, I majored in art in high school, which meant 2 years, so I learned a little bit there. And I suppose I was one of the top couple of kids, which again reinforces it. But I'd been, after I went to Art Center, I got into advertising for about 12 years and freelanced for 3. And then I got a call from a guy I'd gone to Art Center with, Tom Cranham, who said, who asked if I might be interested in the movie industry. And I said, well, I don't know. I'll check it out. What's the story? And he said, basically, the unions had always been tough as hell to get into, but all of a sudden there was so much work that they were dragging people off the street. So I went over and had an interview with Irwin Allen on a wonderful movie called Evel Knievel. I mean, it was really awful, but basically I was doing storyboards, and I'd done advertising storyboards, so what's the big deal? And they taught me a little bit about camera angles and learning how to do arrows that made some sort of sense. And I was off and running, but after I could only work for 6 weeks before I had to join the union. So I did the 6 weeks. The head of the union called, and he's a guy with the new Cadillac every year and jewelry all over himself, and went back to where they burned cars and turned them over in the street and all that stuff. And I said, well, look, I've been doing okay with the advertising right now, so I think I'll pass. And he nearly shit a brick. I mean, he was just violent about what I was passing up. So, anyway, about 6 months later, maybe 3 or 4 months later, the advertising business had dried up. I called my friend Tom to see if anything was going, and he sent me to a guy who was working in the effects department for the first Star Trek movie. But I had to join the union, so it basically meant I had to call this guy, get on my knees, and say, I think it changed my mind, and I probably made a mistake, and I'd like to join the union. So he didn't punish me too much, and that's how I got into it.
So Star Trek was your first major feature film?
Yes.
Okay. Looking at your filmography, Jack, and we'll talk about a handful of those in a little bit, but you've worked on some of the most iconic movies for our generation. We're all here mid-30s. Beetlejuice, Lost Boys, Goonies. You've worked on a lot of movies that are very near and dear to all of us.
Jurassic Park 3.
Jurassic Park 3.
Hey, I love Jurassic Park 3.
Me too.
Oh.
Ace Ventura, Independence Day,
no.
classics.
I'm partial to Christmas Vacation myself. That was a stunner.
A high-level film, yes.
So, let's just jump into it because we want to focus a lot on your work on Ghostbusters 2. How did you transition from what you were working on before? Like, how did you become involved with Ghostbusters?
The production designer, the tendency is for illustrators, among others, to when they get a good relationship with a production designer, they stay with them within reason. What usually happens is the production designer is on the film a hell of a lot longer than you are. So even though they want you and they like your work, you could go 6 months without being able to work with that person. So you wind up having 3 or 4, or at least I did, production designers that would want me to work with them. So generally, it would work out well that way. And Bo Welch was probably one of the 2 best production designers I worked with in my entire career. He, in fact, a little side issue, introduced me to the the Art Directors Guild when they gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award, which then I got to throw in. I'm also in the Academy, so it means that even though I live out here in the middle of nowhere, I get all the videos for all of the films that are up. I don't vote anymore because I just figured I was getting too old and removed from all of it. But it was fun when I did. But hell, I get 70 films, and there's no way I'm going to watch all those over each year and vote. Anyway, sorry to slide sideways there, but Bo is an off-the-wall kind of production designer that could draw himself, which is a whole other story, working for production designers that can actually design and production designers that want you to design. So anyway, once I got on, I'd known him, on Best Defense. There was a film called Star Chamber, Best Defense, then Swing Shift. All three of those films, he was either a set designer or an art director. So I already worked with him by the time we got to Goonies. And then I think Lost Boys was the first one where he was a production designer. And then I worked with him off and on for years. You're going to have to get used to my long-winded answers.
We're happy about that, Jack. So, you've shared with me, some really great images. I wanted to talk about one specifically, and I don't know that you'll be able to see this on the screen. I sure hope. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Yes, I can.
So, right here, this is an image that is really fascinating to a lot of us. This is kind of a dilapidated firehouse that looks like these cutscenes that we've seen still images from over the years. Obviously, it looks like it's sometime between Ghostbusters 1 and 2. Can you talk a little bit about what your directive was for this piece and how you got it? Because this looks like it could be a photo of Hook and Ladder 8 in Tribeca.
I had I believe that to the best of my memory, I had research on that building. Of course, it didn't look like this. So it was my interpretation that, there might have been a couple of fires. The place was boarded up. The more dilapidated and overdone, the better. So that's just basically my interpretation of turning that thing into a boarded up place in a big city.
Very cool. Hey, Jack, when you're going into to start doing these designs, specifically for something like Ghostbusters 2, or any of the films, like since this is the second movie in a franchise, what are you familiar with the first movie at this time? Do you use that as inspiration, or do you just kind of go into it? Does that really matter? Like if it's part of a franchise like that for you and the way that you do your art?
Yeah, you can't deny the first one for a lot of basic stuff. These guys are going back to the same equipment, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the visual, again, through Bo Welch, of, for instance, the lab. As I remember, the lab is all new, and I must have done half a dozen sketches on the lab of various things, and like the even down to the tiles in the floor, because they were used to position other things later. I work with thumbnails. My ideas are small, sometimes like 2 by 3 by 4 inches or even smaller. So, and that is partially my interpretation of what it says in the script. And at some point, I'll take 3 or 4 of what I feel are the most important possible visuals, and or be given that are worked out between me and the production designer. And then as I do those and he looks at them, he gives me direction of which ones he feels are worth taking up to a larger level. And I think, to be honest, Bo had the impression that there was a hell of a lot of money spent on the first film and that we were going to have a pretty good budget. And in reality, they really shut it down. And I guess that tends to be typical with films that are in a series. So we were, well, I didn't even understand it at the time, but he did make that comment at one point, and it's always too bad, because when you're in the beginning, in the background, you can see what the possibilities are for some great visual sets, and it's very disappointing when they don't happen. But again, it's a business and it's a reality. So I usually, even though a production designer says this is what he thinks should go, if I'm convinced that it's worth it on my own time or whatever, I'll take what I think should be done and push it. And sometimes I get away with it. Sometimes that actually gets on the screen. But when you mentioned Jurassic 3, I have no idea what the budgets were for those 2 previous films, but again, it's a different script, so it called in for totally different sets, and that's really yes, you have to be a little influenced by what you saw before, but I think for the most part, it's you try to separate that, and at least with whatever creative ideas you have.
Hey, Jack, I had seen a great video of you visiting the Goonies house for the first time. And it was mind-blowing to me that you drew the house with as much detail without having ever set foot there. And so is that standard? Is that usual, where you don't see in person the places that you're drawing? Or, and if that's the case, what's it like to see them in person for the first time?
I would get, my experience was about 2/3 of the time I never got to go to the location. A good example would be Perfect Storm. I had to draw a lot of that stuff that was actually on location from photographs shot by a location guy. And typically, Goonies was another good example, what the director or production designer thinks they want to see is never the same angle of what I've been given in these shots. So there's a lot of interpolation going on, but I mean, I can see 3/4 of the front of a house and 1/4 of one side, and they want me to see the other side. And anyway, and in Goonies, it was, as I remember, it was like a Polaroid. I was trying to work from a damn Polaroid. So, although the purpose of doing that sketch was to show what the changes were going to be made for the porch or the steps or whatever. And for example, on the left side of the house, instead of trying to cover part of the walls or a window or whatever, we put up, what do you call it? pieces to look as if they were repainting the house or something, which actually covered up what we didn't like on that side of that part of the side of the house. So it's odd that then has become probably the biggest thing that people have wanted from me from that movie is that house. And let me also say that right after that interview, the woman that owned the house allowed me to go inside and take a tour of the house so I could see what they changed. And she, of course, was very proud of the architectural changes. She moved the wall, et cetera, and it really looked very nice. She'd done a great job. I was able to go upstairs to look out one of the windows they used in the film. Anyway, it was really a crack up for me to be able, after all of that, to go in the house and see all the rest of it. And of course, the Goonies fans are almost like the Trekkie fans. I don't know about GB2, whether you get people running around in costumes at events, but they sure did 5 years ago in Oregon.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
I think you'd be surprised, Jack.
Yeah.
Nothing surprises me.
About a year ago, we were all three of us here. We were at Sony Pictures in Culver City, in outfits and gear and such with, hundreds of other fans for a 35th anniversary celebration. So
why it's so cool to talk to you, Jack, is, we are all huge Ghostbusters fans. And Ghostbusters 2, especially within the fandom, which is a large hardcore fandom of people, it's kind of been ignored and it hasn't gotten that special treatment over the years, where we haven't gotten a lot of behind the scenes images or looks at earlier scripts, or in this case, like, pre-production art and things like that. So knowing that it's out there and that we can talk to somebody like you who can give us some insight is a real treat. So I'm
very
really
good.
appreciative. Yeah.
Speaking to what Craig said about the pre-production artwork, I'm just blown away. I'm going to share this image here. By this, can you guys all see that?
Mm-hmm.
This is the data restoration room from the museum in Ghostbusters 2, and looking at this and then knowing in my mind's eye what is on screen, it's just incredible, the detail and how they recreated this. Can you share a little bit about this restoration room with us?
It's very, very vague in my mind as to how it all got together. But typically, Burl Welch, because he could draw, would give me at least architectural pieces to work with. So I don't know whether this was actually part of a museum. I don't remember. But what I would do is would take his research, and he would give me, knowing that it had to be a set on a stage, you were somewhat limited in the scope or the size of the room. You also, unfortunately, you don't know what the cinematographer or the director is going to do with it. For instance, you could do a half room, a three-sided room, if you knew that the director would allow you to work with it. But they generally don't, no matter what's in the storyboard. So you have to design the whole damn room. And as I mentioned earlier to Thomas, I was able to do a full perspective for any given lens at any given distance. So this sketch, for instance, it has the reality. It has an exact depth. The pillars have an exact height. Everything is in a perfect scale. so that guys like Bo could go to the director and everybody else and say, this is what it's going to look like, and it's going to be 100 feet long by 37 feet wide. The ceiling is going to have two depths of whatever it is. The alcove will be so-and-so. And of course, he by then would have set design. If they would have a plan. They'd have 4 elevations at least. And so it then becomes a reality that they can pick this and pick that. But that was the process. So back to this room again. As I remember the film, there's a point where people are standing on a specific design on the floor. And again, that's all sort of built in. Typically trying to do, if you've got time, you put something in the foreground of an illustration that gives not only scale, but gives you more depth. And there are a lot of illustrators that can do fine illustrations, but they generally don't have a light source. Now, as I'm looking at this one, it doesn't have much of a light source, but one of the things I always try to do, well, you can see a little bit at the windows, but to me, when you start casting shadows over a floor or walls or whatever, you give a hell of a lot more reality to the depth of the sketch. And I don't know what, I think that's about it as far as what I have to say on that subject.
That's very cool. That's amazing insight. Yeah, I mean, never having seen this image before as a Ghostbusters fan and familiar with the movie, it's right when you see it, it's undeniable. You know exactly what you're looking at. So to see that, you have those directives and you are building it out from an architecture standpoint and exact measurements, to see this image and then know what we saw on the screen is pretty incredible.
And I love the practical lived-in feeling. You see the paintbrushes out, you see all these details, the cart's just a little off, it's not straight, and it looks like it's being used. And I just love the thought and the detail that you put into that.
Well, thank you. Unfortunately, in those days, we worked with blueprints, sepias, and black lines, which come from a machine called an Oslid machine. They still make blueprints in a similar way today, but that paper is somewhat delicate, and you can see it's been a little beaten up over the years. Another little insight, 5 years ago or 6, when one of my youngest son called me and said, do you know they're having a Goonies reunion, and maybe some of that stuff that you've got stuck in your shop that are just molding away is maybe worth something, and maybe you should take the Goonies stuff out and see what you can make of it. And we wound up taking a trip together up there, and I was blown away that they were interested in so much of that stuff. But that's how all this started, and it was obviously all worthwhile. And as I've said numerous times, I realized how much I enjoy talking about myself. I'm not embarrassed about it at all, but I guess I live by myself, and maybe that's it. Maybe I need more opportunity to talk to somebody. But anyway, excuse me. It's been a long process of shooting, gathering, filing almost 3,000 pieces of artwork and prints and so forth that I've finally got through about a year or two ago. Anyway, sorry.
No, please don't apologize. One thing I was going to chime in with real quick is, as a fan of the films, and then as a collector, you know, a lot of the times to get like a prop or something that was actually used in the movie is just completely ridiculous prices for even for minor things that might be in the background. But then you kind of move on to things like this, these pieces of art, these original, you know, production sketches and things like that. There's this huge market because it's a way to put on your wall a piece of basically your own history, and you're, you know, as a fan of whatever the popular culture is. So
Right.
and it's really great that you've been able to hold on to that stuff all these years.
Jack, is it weird at all? Is it weird that people want that stuff to you?
No, it's just that it's taken a while for me to understand it. You know, when you're talking about Superman or Batman or some of those big corporate successes, I understand that, you know, any piece of it. But I was surprised about Goonies. I'm surprised about Ghostbusters 2. You know, I could understand Ghostbusters 1. Same thing with Jurassic 3. The idea of one of your favorite films, Thomas, being Christmas Vacation, that's another one that I would just go right over my head. So it's been an interesting process the last 4 or 5 years. So, again, as another aside, my older son, who's pretty sharp, and he's a still photographer as well as an advertising photographer. At one point, a couple of years ago, we were talking about what the hell my kids are going to do with all this stuff when I'm gone. And I asked him how he was going to handle all of this, and he said, "Well, I don't know. I guess I'd take a few things, keep a few things, and offer some to the friends and whatever the other kids wanted, and then I'd shit can it." So every couple of months, when I sell another $3,000 or $4,000 of something, I make sure I let him know as the numbers keep rising what he was going to shit can.
That's great.
You know, Jack, it's really interesting to me that you said the last 4 or 5 years, because, you know, Matt knows this. Craig, I haven't known as long, so this will be something new to Craig, I guess. But, you know, I've been personally trying to learn your name for about 4 or 5 years, because as it stands, you were kind of previously unknown to us. And as Craig touched on, there's not a lot out there for Ghostbusters 2 in regard to behind the scenes. But there's a piece that you did specifically that I've been desperate to know who was responsible for, and I want to go ahead and share that with you right now, because to me this is the just the most amazing thing, and I don't know if you all can see that.
Yep.
So you know, Jack, I told you before, we lovingly refer to this painting as the Fettuccines. From the end of Ghostbusters 2. It's a unique drawing. It comes as a big surprise at the end of the movie, because it's not where you expect to see Bill Murray and Harold Ramis, and Dan Aykroyd and Ernie, you know, with a harp. So, you know, I know we have a lot of fans who are going to be interested in this piece and kind of the genesis of it. It's very religious, and that probably ties into the themes of the movie, but I just wanted to hear you talk a little bit about this, you know, for my own satisfaction, but also for the satisfaction of hundreds and thousands of fans out there. Can you tell us a little bit about this piece?
This was, as far as I know, a Bo Welch idea. It's something he got out of the script that. I don't think it was that specific, but what he came to me and he wanted a semi-religious period-looking painting that was not necessarily realistic. I think I found an old painting, God knows what century it was, that had this sort of curved feeling over the top. And I just went from there. I don't know where I found the damn palm trees or whatever. But I was scared to death because, and you saw the rough for this thing, trying to do 4 faces and match the actual faces of the guys was very, very difficult because they're so familiar with everybody, but at least I was supplied shots. And the baby was another problem, as we've discussed before, that the baby was repainted. I don't know whether that had anything to do with Bo or the director or whoever, and there were other minor changes with a hand here and a leaf there and so on. But typically, I didn't feel I had enough time. So this winds up being very inconsistent. The faces are obviously rendered to the nth degree. The figures are not rendered as much, and the background is even less rendered. So from a painter's opinion, this is not a very good painting. But knowing in the business, you sometimes are stuck with it. You just don't have enough time. And the other side of that coin is if you give somebody like an illustrator enough 2 weeks to do a job, he'll do it in 2 weeks. You give him 3 days, he'll do it in 3 days. But you want as much time as you can steal. And I think the renderings of the faces are, yes, they're pretty good to relate to. I think on the let's see, it would be Peter or Bill Murray's face. The eyes are out of proportion. And the right eye. Anyway, you get my meaning. As an illustrator, I can go in there and find every damn thing that's wrong with it. And it's not that I'm looking for praise or somebody say, "Oh no, it's wonderful." It's just the reality of it, and you can't get away from it. And of course, to look back now and see fingers that are a little too long and shadows that aren't right, and it just. It's unfortunate, but it was a hell of a fun project that scared me to death.
Jack, everything you're highlighting, as somebody who's not an artist, obviously, these are things that I would never pick up on. I find this image, there are some differences from the final image, but there's something very charming and just very real and like. Just taking a step back and actually like looking at it for what it is. And there's an element of like seriousness and obviously a lot of silliness too. So I just appreciate it so much. How big, so for the original piece that you're submitting, how big of a painting is it to give people some perspective on that?
It's 20 inches high, like 14 and a half inches wide. And okay. Thomas and I have decided to make it, as far as a print, offering 50% larger. So it'll be more like 30 inches high by 22 inches wide.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I dabble in collecting art prints and screen prints, and I think there's going to be a nice size audience of people who are really going to want this, and I know it's going on my wall. So I appreciate you giving Tom the opportunity to partner up on that, because that okay. Is I've got every history of Ghostbusters book, visual art book, making of book, and when Tom reached out to me, I said, holy shit, I have never seen this. And I've reached out to a couple people who I would consider Ghostbusters archivalists, and they have no idea that the stuff even exists. So it's very, very cool.
It's sometimes irritating that somebody like me is not called or considered when you do the making of. And I don't know, I guess it depends on who's generating the idea that, oh, this is a fantastic film, we need to do the making of, since they don't do it on every film. But quite often, illustrators, many of whom help really create these films, aren't involved. And it's funny, Thomas mentioned Superman Lives as to the nightmare that went through that film. And I again, maybe because I retired, maybe because I live 3 hours from LA, there were at least three illustrators that had something to say about it, but I was never called or considered or anything else, which is too bad because I had some rather violent things to say about it. But I've never seen it. I've never seen I have a script. I have a script on every film I've worked on, which again is another story. But when you say you have a script, in some cases there may be 30 or 40 versions, and there is certainly a first script and a last script, which I think it'd probably really be important if you had both. But at any rate, yeah.
Jack, is that to suggest that you have an early Ghost 2 draft?
I don't know. I got maybe 70 scripts in a closet in boxes, and I did go through them, I don't know, 3 or 4 months ago. So I'm sure I have at least one script on Goonies, but I have no idea at what point that script is.
Well, if that Ghostbusters 2 script turns up, I think everybody on this call would be very interested in that. We did talk about Superman Lives a little yesterday. This is my script for Superman Lives. If you can see that, I don't know if you can.
Yeah, I can.
It's always fascinated me, the genesis of this. I told you it interests me because the idea of Nicolas Cage as Superman is just kind of off the wall, I guess. So it's really interesting that you have
well,
that.
if you consider the bodysuit he was going to wear, it made it all more possible. And a little side thing on that, he wanted that movie made so badly. He was willing to do just about anything to get it made, but the war that went on was that film was never going to get made.
Yeah, what an incredible story. So much goes into getting a film off the ground in the first place, but to know that they were a couple weeks out from cameras and the whole thing got shut down, that's pretty amazing. I did want to chime in with one thing before you guys touch on anything else. I watch Independence Day like once a month, always have. It's one of the all-time great sci-fi classics. So maybe a separate conversation down the line. I would love to see anything you contributed, because I think it really stands alone as just really good popcorn sci-fi, and it totally holds up.
Well,
and the sequel is really bad.
I have to admit that that shouldn't even be on my resume. If you can stand another 2 minutes story,
Sure.
can you handle it?
I think so.
I was hired, and I think I was the first illustrator on the film. They were going to hire 4, I believe. There was a director, a young production supervisor or a executive. He must have been about 25. And there was a secretary and maybe one other person. I took the script. I spent 10 minutes talking about it with the director. I was going to do opening scenes, and we were just talking storyboards. So at Fox, there's a building with an upstairs and a stairway coming up to a veranda where I had my drafting table, and I was working. And all of a sudden, it's 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. These people showed up and started taking seats and drinking coffee and having donuts, and it started to get a little louder. And this guy comes up the stairway in torn jeans and a t-shirt, and sort of everything got quiet, and he said a few things. Anyway, it got louder. Two guys came by, bumped my drafting table, and I said, "Hey." And I yelled it, "Hey, could you guys go into your meeting or keep it quiet?" And this guy comes over and leans on my drafting table, and he looks at me and he says, "Do you know who," it was a classic, "do you know who I am?" Well, he turned out to be the John, now I can't remember his last name, but he's a big guy with a big name and a lot of big films. And anyway, he started with, "Well, why can't you come in later, or why can't you do?" And I said, "Hey, I'm just trying to work here." And I leaned back in his face because I could see he was putting on a show for these people that were working on his film, whatever that was. And so it was a standoff, and he had made his point about how important he was. And about 10 to 15 minutes later, this young executive calls and would like me to come down to his office. And so I go down there, and he says, "You know, we are sorry, we just really didn't, we thought we were going to, in other words, we don't need you anymore." And I said, "Well, I'll be glad to finish the work for the day." And he said, No, I think what? And finally, I said, "Can you really look at me and say that with a straight face that it had nothing to do with that little performance upstairs?" And he said, "Oh no, it had nothing to do with it." Anyway, it's the first time I'd ever been fired. I made a couple of phone calls, and I had 2 offers to start the next day on other films, so I basically didn't give a shit. But it's really unfortunate because I would have loved to finish that film, and I know it would have grown into more than just storyboards, but such is war. Sorry, I can't tell you more good stories about it.
That's a great story. I'm trying to piece together who that would have been. Because I'm not happy about it. I'm not happy that happened to you.
I wish I'm having trouble remembering the director that he worked for. He was his top guy.
Gotcha.
Jim Cameron. It was Jim Cameron's executive producer.
Well, that makes all the more sense.
John what was his last name? Or if I got that wrong.
Oh, man. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing.
So, we have one other Ghostbusters 2 topic to touch on. Before we do, Matt, Craig, do you want to pick Jack's brain on any of his other works? I know Lost Boys, Beetlejuice. He's involved in so many of these things, Jack, and I know it's interesting to a lot of us beyond this conversation.
Not specifically. I just appreciate the entire body of work, and I'm so happy to be able to see some of this stuff from some of my favorite movies. It's very, very cool.
I'm in the same boat. There's just so much of this stuff. wish, Jack, that we could somehow put together a book of all your stuff that everyone could see all the pieces that you worked on. Because I would just love to sit through and look at all the stuff you worked on for all the movies that we've discussed so far.
Did you guys all see the poster?
With all your works?
Yeah.
Yeah, I sent that to the group.
Okay. So that obviously gives you a vague idea of pieces of other films. I've been trying to write a book for the last 3 years. I think visually I'm probably 3/4 of the way through it. I'm not a writer. I have a writer friend, and we're trying to work together, but I have been trying to sell my property and working a lot more on the property to get it to where I think it needs to be. So our writing the last 6 months to a year has been minimal, but I hope that within a year I can publish that book. I have probably 30 or 40 spreads of the movies that I've already at least roughed out visually with copy. I suppose I could send you a couple of examples that would at least give you an idea where I'm going with it. But yes, I hope. And if I'd been smarter about this, I would have the book done a few years ago, and I think it would have a great deal to do with the value of the stuff you guys are talking about.
Very cool.
That's fantastic.
That would be great.
We'll all
That would
be
be
looking
great.
forward to that and hosting a book signing for you when it's released.
There you go.
Okay.
We're going to be offering 4 prints to our members and to the community at large. We've touched on 3 of them. I want to touch on this last print before we let you get back to your day, Jack. So I'm going to go ahead and share this. This one, when I saw your work, Jack, when you shared all those with me, this one to me stood out as just kind of mind-blowing in how beautiful it is and how accurate they got it. What we're looking at here is the infamous River of Slime, the Horne Pneumatic Transit. Even seeing, we know immediately what we're looking at. We know that's Dan Aykroyd dangling there beneath 4th Avenue. I know I definitely want to hear about a little bit about this. Can you share some of your experiences working on this piece?
Sure. It was supposed to be an undiscovered old, I'm thinking, anyway, we had some research on this type of ceiling and walls, the curved, the way the tiles fit in, and of course nothing exactly from the angle we wanted. A lot of the piping and all that stuff is ad lib, but the angle or the curve down that path of slime was made up. And I can't tell you how much time I spent trying to project something that looked right as far as the stairway coming down into an area and then the arches overhead. It was a hell of a time-consuming, difficult illustration. And as I mentioned before, there are always things wrong with it when you look back. But when I was trying to make that flashlight work, I didn't airbrush anything, and so it's kind of amateurish. But for the purpose of selling it again, that was going to be a set, and it was going to be so big and so tall, etc. I think we did a hell of a job with it.
I have to say, Jack, this is probably my favorite piece that I've seen. I love the detail, and I love that you're modest about your abilities, because I think this is absolutely stunning. and beautiful, far from amateurish. And again, I think I can speak for all of us that this has been an absolute treat spending time with you today and learning about your work on Ghostbusters and so many other films that we have grown up and loved. And in a very real way, you helped design and bring to reality the films that we grew up on and everything that we've enjoyed. And so thank you so much for using your gifts and your ability and your talents to bring to life some of our favorite movies and franchises and stories. And I don't think we can thank you enough for your time and your willingness to sign some stuff and make these prints available to all of us. We greatly, greatly appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, just to comment on that last piece, that's absolutely incredible. I mean, the River of Slime, that the whole Van Horn, abandoned train station, like that's the iconography that we all remember from that movie. And to see it kind of in that landscape, if you really look at it, it's really insane. Like the detail of that piece, every brick is there.
Every brick. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really incredible. So, and I'll echo Matt's words. Thanks for doing this.
Okay. Thank you.
And Craig, I see a spot on your wall over there to the right where that would fit perfectly, I think.
Oh, I've got there's a bunch of Ghostbusters stuff behind me. So,
yeah,
there's always room for more stuff on the wall, and I can't wait to get my hands on this stuff.
Great.
So any closing thoughts here? I'll just thank you as well, Jack. You and I, we've been talking for a while. You're such a delight to speak with. I've really enjoyed all of our conversations. You're just one of the nicest folks in the business that we've had the pleasure of meeting and speaking with. And personally, I'm just blown away by your art. I'm so grateful that through happenstance we came together. I think this is going to be a really exciting opportunity for the fandom. It's definitely an opportunity for me. I'm already making space for these things, and it's really, really.
Oh, thank you, Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, just one last chime in for me, just to think that was 1989. It looks like you worked on it in '88, and then it was supposed to be this year, but it's now going to be early next year. So 32 years later, we're getting a sequel. Ghostbusters is back in a big way, and this kind of stuff really adds to that excitement.
Good. I'm looking forward to the relationship.